Okay, thank you. I've got a lot to live up to after that introduction. Not a single thing that was said was true, but DNS is very exciting, as it should be. Right, so we're going to cover what the problem is with DNS. You might have guessed with my t-shirt that DNS is always the problem. What the challenges are with filtering your DNS traffic. What you can do with a service called Amazon Route 53 Resolver DNS Firewall. First of all, you can shorten the name. We'll call it something else. It's far too long. Then I'll do a little bit of a demo and then some recommendations on DNS Firewall. So this is a statistic and some quotes from Palo Alto a couple of years ago. And essentially DNS is as much of a security concern as web and email traffic, and yet a lot of people just don't pay the right kind of attention to securing DNS, with 85% of malware abuses on DNS coming through. So these things can be really effective, especially if you have DGA, which is domain generation algorithms, which is automatically generating lots of domain names on the fly, and that's growing year on year, and the statistics for 2023 and 2024 are even higher. Right, so the challenges if you're going to filter DNS traffic yourself are that the clicker needs to be right over here. So first of all, if you're not actually doing it, then you haven't perhaps got the capabilities to do this at all. You might not have that feature turned on, which then means that you've got a potential risk of exfiltration of data through DNS. If you're doing this using homegrown DNS servers to manage the traffic, the DNS traffic, you might not have the number of servers that you need. You might not have the capabilities within those servers to be able to actually filter out malicious DNS requests. But it also can take a lot of time and a lot of effort and maintenance for you to build and to manage all of that. And then if you think about perhaps using a third-party service, you might have a multi-vendor approach. There's overhead in having multiple vendors. Some customers are happy to have multiple vendors, but it can, again, have an additional cost and additional management overhead, which a lot of customers are looking for simplicity in these services. So what we have as a service, and we launched it a few years ago, is Amazon Route 53 Resolver DNS Firewall, or let's just call it DNS Firewall, or otherwise it's a 40-minute lightning talk. This is a firewall for the Route 53 Resolver, which is the DNS resolver in every account in VPC. And this is a managed service that AWS provides. It's highly available, and it allows you to either allow or deny DNS traffic across all of your VPCs centrally using Firewall Manager. So there are 4 key features of DNS Firewall. First one is that it will do DNS filtering. Obviously a core feature. So we've got domain name-based filtering. There are allow lists and deny lists, and we have some custom actions as well. So you can do no data, you can do NX domain, or you can do an override response, depending on what your needs are. Next thing you can do is there are a set of managed rules. So these are DNS-based lists that are managed by AWS. And we've got 3 options. We've got an aggregate list, we've got a malware list, and we've got a botnet CNC list. And also, recently launched is another list from an alliance that we have with Recorded Futures. And what I'll show you when we move into just after this is some of the features of the Recorded Futures alliance and some of the other things that we're doing within our services to start to bring the intelligence that we've seen through Guard Duty and other services through into this, so that it all starts to work as one. Now, I talked about central management. So you can centrally manage DNS Firewall using Firewall Manager. It gives you cross-account management of this at an organizational level if you so choose. And what you can do is consistently enforce your DNS firewall policy. You can do it on a VPC level. You can pick particular accounts to have particular DNS policies. And it's going to give you that visibility. It's going to give you that management into your DNS security that you haven't had before. And then you can use AWS RAM, Resource Access Manager, to share that across your accounts as well, if you so wish. As part of that, you also get a lot of visibility and reporting. You get a per rule CloudWatch metric for that, so you can see which of your rules are triggering most often. You can also send the logs out to S3, out to CloudWatch. You can send them out to Kinesis as well with the VPC query logging. And once you have that visibility, then you can see, and you can take different actions. You can block, you can allow, or you can alert, just like other firewall services within AWS. And if you're alerting, then you can see the impact that enabling certain rules would have on your DNS traffic. And you can decide if you really do want to block that or not. And I'll touch on recommendations for how you should approach DNS firewall deployments. So diving into the managed domain lists. The AWS and Recorded Futures managed domain lists are updated hourly and daily. We've got aggregated DNS threat category lists for botnet, CNC, command and control, and also for malware. And these aggregate lists are going to give you comprehensive protection against lots of different DNS threats all at once. So, if you look at all these different kinds of categories, so things like DNS tunneling, cryptocurrency mining, I mentioned earlier DGA with the domain generation algorithm. We've also got things like botnets and phishing. So you can use these from the very beginning to get you going. You can build your own domain lists as well as you build it up over time. So let's look at a typical web application architecture. So we've got some ingress on the left-hand side, the users coming in through a WAF, application load balancer to the workloads. Those workloads are then doing egress, where in this scenario here, they're going to go out through DNS Firewall. So let's ignore the ingress and focus on the egress part. So if you've got the workloads, whenever a workload is making a request outside of your VPC, what it has to do, first of all, if it's going to a DNS name, is to resolve that DNS name. Now, to do that, it goes to what we call the .2. So if you look inside the IP address space within each of your VPCs, there's a .2 reserved address. That's the DNS resolver for Route 53. If you enable DNS Firewall, what happens is that the DNS Firewall is what actually responds first. And the DNS Firewall will then process that request, decide if that request is allowed or denied. It will go to the Route 53 resolver to actually make an upstream request if it has to. And that will in turn go out to the authoritative servers on the internet to resolve those IP addresses. So if something is allowed, it will be sent off to Route 53 to get resolved, and then you'll actually get the IP address. And then the workload will then make that outbound connection, and in this scenario here, it's out through network firewall, which means that out through network firewall, out through that gateway, and there's a shorter list of legitimate destinations that you're allowing these workloads to actually reach out to. Now, if you don't have DNS Firewall, then you're relying upon other controls such as, say, network firewall, or perhaps you're relying upon, say, an outbound security group, which is only going to be IP address related. You can do DNS lists and network firewall, but DNS Firewall is a much more efficient and a really low cost, architecturally really simple way of actually deploying this kind of protection. It doesn't require any changes to your routing, doesn't require any changes to the design of your architecture. You simply have to enable the feature, and then any time that a workload is making a request to the .2 resolver, DNS Firewall is picking up that request. Now, I talked about Firewall Manager, being able to manage this, and when you've got Firewall Manager enabled, you can enable this across the entirety of your organization. It uses those managed lists that I've spoken about already. You can decide which accounts are going to have which managed lists. You can create your own individual domain lists and apply different domain lists to allow or to block the access to different domain names and different categories of types of websites. And you can manage it all from a single place. You can then, you don't have to have access to each of the individual accounts to actually go into that and set up the individual DNS firewall in each of your accounts, which as you're scaling to tens or hundreds of thousands of accounts is going to make it a lot easier for you to manage. Now, there is a demo. It runs to about 3 minutes, so I'll just kick it off, hopefully. There we go. Okay, so this is in the VPC. You go into domain lists. I'm creating my own domain list here. And I'm going to add in aws.amazon.com. So I've created my own domain list. I'm going to do something with that domain list next. Now what I'm going to do is go into DNS Firewall, create a rule group. So I'll create this rule group. And what I'll do is I'll add all the different rules into the rule group. So let me add a rule. So I'm going to add this one, which is going to be a domain list, which is my own domain list that I created. So you see the list there now appears. And I decide, am I going to allow block or alert on that? So I'm going to block with an NX domain response. Next, I'm going to add another rule. And this is going to be the malware managed domain list. So I'll add that. Select from the list. You can see we've got a number of them there. So pick the malware one. And I've decided I'm going to block this. I'm also going to block that with an NX domain response. One more rule I think I'll add into that one. Let me add in the guard duty one. So I'll add in the guard duty. Again, these are all managed lists that are managed by AWS and in conjunction with recorded futures as well. So we're going to block on that, but with a no data response in that one. Next, you associate that with a VPC. So I've got a VPC, so I associate that. Wait for it to process. I have shortened it here, and it's now, that's it done. So I've not made any architectural changes to my infrastructure at all, simply associating that with the VPC. So now I go in, I do a dig on aws.amazon.com, and you'll come back and you see it says status is NX domain, and it's not responded with anything. Now I'll try, and we've got certain domains. These are in the documentation. You can test this out. So I'm going to do, first of all, Amazon.com. You can see I get a response on that one. So I'm still able to access Amazon.com, but I'm blocking aws.amazon.com. Now I've got one for malware, and you can see it's got NX domain with no response. So you can test that, so you can prove the efficacy of the rule. And then I'll do a dig on the aggregate list, which is the guard duty one, and you'll see it comes back with no data, but it doesn't have NX domain. It's just got a no data. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to update the domain list that I had, and instead of blocking it, I'm going to do an allow. So this is done in real time. There's no shortening of this. I do a dig on aws.amazon.com, and you can see I got that response back. So I immediately get all of the DNS names and IP addresses for that domain. So super quick to do, really easy to implement. Again, doesn't take any architectural change to do that. All the things I've spoken about over the last 14 minutes about DNS Firewall, it's going to do DNS-based firewall, DNS-based filtering. You attach it to your VPCs. It will prevent DNS exfiltration of your data if you so choose. It's going to give you protection against malware and botnet command and control servers, because a lot of the traffic that we actually see that these kinds of activities try to do is all based upon domain-generated algorithms for domain lists, and using this kind of capability is going to give you a lot of protection against that. You can do a lot of cross-account management with Firewall Manager. You can manage this from a centralized place, and you can either choose to have it fail open or fail closed, so that in the event of this not working, then you're not actually going to block any of your existing traffic going out. Obviously, if you have the alerting, if there was an issue with the service, then you'll be able to address that. As I said before, you get per rule CloudWatch metrics, so you can see which of the rules are triggering the most. And if that rule is a block rule and you start to get complaints internally about why certain things have been blocked, then you'll be able to see and dive deep into that with the logs as well. Some recommendations on implementing DNS Firewall within your own organizations. Start slow and build it up. So crawl, then walk, then run. If you really want to upset everybody in your organization, block it from the outset, but we would not be recommending that. What you really want to be doing is leveraging our managed domain lists, starting in one VPC, put it into allow mode, or you could even put it then into alert mode. So that alert mode is going to show you which of the things within that rule set are actually going to be triggered and would be blocked. And then switch it to a default block. Importantly, you really do need to understand the outbound connections that you have. So enabling things like DNS query logs and VPC flow logs are really important as well. If you don't understand what the application requirements are, then enabling DNS Firewall is going to give you some trouble in the future. So you really need to focus on domain names and talk to your application developers. They should understand this best. And perhaps you need to build your own individual application specific domain lists that you will allow outbound access to. Integrated with Network Firewall, that gives you threat detection as well at the outbound connection, as you saw, once the DNS query has actually been resolved. And also use Firewall Manager to centrally manage it. So, that's the end of the lightning talk.